समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
We are stepping away from the war in the Gulf today, giving it a break, but not quite giving ourselves a break and thereby staying within the war. We are not talking about what's happening in the battlefield. We are talking about the consequences for us, particularly the Indian consumer, the ordinary Indian citizen. What we see right now is the distress over LPG. Government keeps on saying every day that they have enough LPG. Every tanker as it comes in, that is celebrated, that makes headlines. It's almost like in the 1960s, there were news items on the front pages saying 2 more ships laden with wheat have arrived from the US. That was our ship to mouth existence. Now it looks like ship to burner, tanker to burner existence. So LPG is what has got attention right now. However, if the war continues, then other stress points will also come. Right now, if you're driving an automobile, you're riding a taxi, an Uber, whatever. Right now, we haven't felt the crunch, the pressure. But this will come if the war goes on, because how long will the government hold on to petroleum prices, the pump prices in India? They've done so far. I can see because of the elections, some of the elections are critical for the government, particularly West Bengal. So if the war goes on, then 28th April onwards, watch out for those pump prices. More pressure points will build up. The reasons are very simple. India imports almost 90% of its crude oil needs. If anything, India's crude oil production has not been increasing. It's been falling for the past many years, going back to 2011, in fact. And also because India has large import dependence on gas as well. More importantly, India specifically has a larger import dependence on LPG. So all of this mix will come under stress. What we see right now is only LPG, because LPG is where our import dependence is the greatest, and LPG is also an area which Modi government has pushed in a big way, because they came in with the Ujjwala scheme, taking LPG to the poorest households, which is a very good idea, because if you burn organic matter, it can be leaves, it can be wood, it can also be cow dung cakes to cook, to work at home, then that produces smoke, that produces really bad air quality, and is very bad for people working in the kitchen, which is mostly women. This has been a very good initiative, and the success of the initiative lies in the fact that 32 crore households in India now use LPG. So LPG connections are 32 crores right now. It's a hell of a lot. However, a lot of it is imported. That is the reason LPG has got the first pressure. If you look at India's LPG production, India produces generally about 30% of its LPG needs. LPG is liquefied petroleum gas. I know all these acronyms are now floating in the air, and they will continue to float in the air. So just as at COVID time, we had all become virologists, we are all becoming energy specialists right now. That's the life of a journalist. You have to read and you have to learn. So see the various acronyms that will become part of our lives right now, just as all those virology terms had during COVID days. Because what's happening right now, if it continues, if this war goes on another month or so, then the calamity on the world, not in terms of lives lost, but in terms of just economic distress, will be no less worse than the COVID calamity. That's why I get used to LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, and I will tell you why each one has its name, or CNG, compressed natural gas, PNG. They are all gas, they're all varieties of gas. PNG, which is piped natural gas, and LNG, which is liquefied natural gas. All these are different varieties of gas or natural gas or hydrocarbon gas which are transported in different ways, which are packaged in different ways, which are utilized in different ways. In some cases, they also have different calorific value. For example, the PNG that we burn in our home, for example, in Delhi, almost all of Delhi now has Indraprasth Gas Limited pipelines. So you can use a pipeline and get pipeline gas in your home 24/7. There's no booking cylinders, going and getting cylinders, having one delivered to you. You can have it coming into your pipeline. You pay a bill. It costs you a little bit more than the LPG cylinder gas. However, it is much more convenient and it's always available. That is not the one that India is short of right now, and I will explain to you why. PNG, that is piped natural gas, for the simple reason that it comes to you through a pipe. This is natural gas as it comes from the well. India produces about 50% of its need of natural gas. Some of it comes from the various oil fields in India, and quite a bit of it comes from the Krishna Godavari Basin oil fields run both by Reliance and British Petroleum and also by ONGC. In fact, that's where India hopes and expects that they are digging a couple more wells, that gas production will go up. That's how on natural gas, India produces about 50%, import dependence is 50%. Also, this gas is available elsewhere in the world. India is not so dependent on the Gulf countries. I will tell you how. How does this gas come into India? This gas comes into India in the form of what is PNG, used to be LNG. LNG is liquefied natural gas. So when gas comes out of a field, it can be in the US. India is buying now quite a bit from the US. It can be from Australia. Australia has been trying to sell India liquefied natural gas for a very long time, except the tanker cost seemed to be too high. With energy, economics is always an issue. When life is normal, when there is peace in the world, when crude prices come down to $60 for Brent, $60 per barrel, then all of these calculations go awry. Then a lot of the things that we are talking about today would look like they are not feasible. Where's the point of spending all this money, buying all these LNG tankers, getting gas from Australia? It's so expensive when you can buy it cheaper in the Gulf. Or maybe when crude is so much cheaper, but when crude goes up to 110, 120, then everything else becomes feasible. That's how energy economics works, and that's how even the exploration and production also become cyclical. When prices go up, then you start investing. By the time you've invested and you've started exploiting, by the time you've invested and you started harvesting the result of that, maybe the prices have gone down, because nobody can anticipate these cycles. Who can anticipate when another fresh round of fighting will break out between, say, Israel and Iran? Or who can anticipate, or who could have anticipated that Russia will invade Ukraine at such a large scale and will face such massive sanctions that will go on for such a long time? That's why energy markets are very problematic and very tricky. Now, once again, back to this. I told you how PNG comes in. In India right now, about 1.5 crore households have PNG. And you might have seen that the government is putting out advertisements. Ministers are making statements, asking more and more people to shift to PNG. That's again because 50% of natural gas we make ourselves, our import dependence is less, and also the rest we can get as LNG. I will come back to what I'd said earlier. LNG comes in ships, in specialized LNG tankers. Why is it called liquefied? For gas, natural gas to liquefy, it has to be cooled to very low temperatures, almost like minus 160, 150, 160, 170 degrees. Once it's cooled like that, it compresses. It compresses to the size of, to the extent of 1:1000. So say, for simplicity of understanding, that 1,000 units of this gas will then become like 1 unit. So you can transport a lot of this gas in these containers, LNG containers. These then come to your gas terminals, LNG terminals. India now has 8 specialized LNG terminals because India is really hungry for energy. India is a growing economy, very large population, and India has been signing LNG deals with various countries, especially Qatar. And this gas has been this gas has been coming in. This gas then is converted into more natural gas, and that is then supplied to the industry and supplied to households through the larger pipelines that Gas Authority of India built across the country. So far in India, there are 25,000 kilometers of pipelines. However, these pipelines do not go to many parts of the country. 25,000 kilometers have been built. Another 10,500 kilometers are being built. So the big cities, metro cities have the pipelines, are connected with the pipelines. Otherwise, the pipelines were generally designed to connect the industrial hubs in the country. And as a result, many areas of the east, a lot of the areas in central India, east central India, some of the poorest parts of India are not properly connected with pipelines. The other challenge with PNG and with city gas delivery, as it's called, CGD, that's one more acronym, better get used to it because you will be hearing more and more of it. One more challenge is that India is so poorly urbanized. India is urbanizing, but sort of in a completely unplanned, chaotic way. We are not planning our cities. We are not building any new cities. In fact, we haven't built any new city since Chandigarh, and that is by global standards still a tiny city. Because India has not built big cities, its big cities have grown haphazardly. Its tier 2, tier 3 cities have also grown haphazardly. So what are our cities? Our cities are basically a combination of potholes, open drains, encroachments, unauthorized constructions, and even if you look up, you see a web of cables and wires. Our cities are a bloody mess. And it's because of that mess that it becomes really difficult, almost impossible to take these gas pipelines through our cities. That's why even in our metro cities, not all areas can be serviced by gas pipelines because there is no right of way. There is no way to get those pipelines there. Now that is something that is a work in the progress. Government already is pushing people towards piped natural gas. There are incentives being given to city gas distribution CGD companies. Also, many families which have PNG in their homes but are also holding on to LPG connections. They've been told, in fact, ordered to give up their LPG connections. They can no longer book LPG. That is about 6 million families. At the moment, India has about 1.5 crore families which totally rely on PNG, and the government believes that once the 60 lakh others give up their LPG connections as they've been ordered to, then this number will become about 2 crores. It's still very small. 2 crore using PNG compared with 32 crore depending on LPG. Now, where does LPG come from? And why is LPG a bit of a complication? We had spoken about it in some detail in an earlier episode, of which we'll share a link with you. But LPG is a combination of butane and propane. It comes as a byproduct of crude processing. It can also be produced from natural gas. This combination, when propane and butane are mixed, this is then cooled and put under pressure. That is how it comes in your cylinder. It's put under pressure, in much higher pressure, to be put into tankers as it comes from, say, Qatar or UAE, which is our largest supplier of LPG. In fact, UAE is 36.5% of our imports. Qatar is 21.4% of our imports. Kuwait is 16% and Saudi Arabia is 14%. If you add all of it up, then you're already looking at about 88% of our LPG imports. Not all our LPG are LPG imports. Our LPG generally in the normal course, about 60 to 65% has been imported, 30 to 35% has been produced domestically, most of it as a byproduct of crude distillation at our refineries, of crude refining at our refineries. India has some of the biggest oil refineries in the world, And now, because India is so short of LPG, the government has asked these refineries to produce more LPG as their byproduct. Now, as you can understand, and there's only this much of the many things that the crude oil can yield. So if you produce more LPG, you will be producing less of something else. The government, however, at this point has asked oil refineries to produce more of LPG, which means at this point our dependence would be less than about 50% once these refineries kick in entirely with their increased LPG production. Once again, to understand the LPG problem, India's need is about 34 million tons per year, 34 million tons per annum, of which India produces 12 million tons per annum in the normal times. Now India has upped it. The rest is imported, and of that is imported, 90%. 90% comes through the Gulf of Hormuz, because as I told you, almost all of it, about 88%, comes from UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. If you just add these all up, if you throw in Oman also, then you would say almost all of it. It's only lately that India has been ordering some LPG from the US as well. The fact is that all of the rest of the world will struggle to produce enough LPG for India's need, and that is where India has to look for options. The meetings of some of the data we get is coming from the meetings of parliamentary committees. Parliamentary committees of various ministries are meeting these days to discuss the budgetary demands of each ministry. The presentation that the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas made to its own committee, they said that by 2034, they intend to take PNG households to 12 crores. However, even if that happens, even if GAIL builds more pipelines, if pipelines connect more cities, if our cities somehow dramatically improve their governance, and maybe there's an incentive structure built in, even then, if we only reach the number of 12%, the fact is India's PNG consumption or PNG spread has been increasing at about 18% compounded annual growth rate. However, to get to 12 crores, it has to grow much faster, maybe 25%. But why should India only grow at 25%? The biggest constraint there will be the quality of our city governance. If anything, it's one more incentive for our city governance to improve now. India's north and the west are better covered still by the pipelines, but the east and the central India are a disaster. The east will also include some of our most heavily populated areas, some of our poorest and the most heavily populated areas, Bihar, large parts of Uttar Pradesh, not very urbanized, not heavily urbanized, also West Bengal, all of these, and the Northeast, all of these will continue to have LPG dependence for a very long time. Now, does India have to be LPG dependent forever? Dependence can come down on the fact is that if the MOPNG targets are met, I hope they will be. In fact, I'm quite sure they can be met, and they will be met. Even then, more than 20 crore Indian households will be dependent on LPG. That's why this progress has to be made more ambitious. Either it has to be more ambitious or India has to move to something else, to other alternatives, because parts of the world that produce hydrocarbons, they are prone to instability. It's one thing for us to say, oh, Americans, the Western powers, they start wars in these countries because there is oil. Wars start because of oil. But it's also because many of these regions have the resource curse. It's because of the oil and the easy wealth that the oil gives them that they don't see the incentive to improve their political systems, to move towards democracy. It is the availability of wealth, easy wealth from oil and other resources that incentivizes their governments to continue with dictatorships so they can use this money to buy up their populations, to distribute welfare, to distribute largesse in many ways. That's why as long as you remain dependent on hydrocarbons, particularly hydrocarbons which are crude and gas related, crude and natural gas related, you will always be prone to these shocks. In fact, even in my lived memory, 1973, the Yom Kippur War, oil shock. That's when oil producing countries got together, cartelized up the prices. That contributed to India's inflation rates also going upwards of 28%, and a lot of popular disaffection, and ultimately Mrs. Gandhi imposing the emergency because she could not handle that disaffection, that anger. Then we saw the tanker war between 1986 to 1988 between Iran and Iraq. That did not involve Israel, that did not involve any Western powers. It was Iran fighting Iraq, two Islamic countries, neighboring Islamic countries fighting each other. For the record, it is Iraq that invaded Iran because they thought Iran was just coming out of the revolution. It was weak, so Saddam Hussein invaded Khomeini's Iran. They fought each other to a very bloody and a very cruel standstill. The last 2 years of that was tanker war that led to an oil shock. Then 1990-91, the occupation of Kuwait. That is when Saddam Hussein not only ruined Kuwait's oil wells, but also as he was retreating, set them on fire. I, along with Prashant Panjiyar, our photographer at India Today, we were there and we walked across, or we walked across the zones where these oil wells were burning, and I cannot tell you what an awful sight it was. These were really giant oil wells burning, and that caused one more oil shock. After that, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that caused an oil shock because of the sanctions, and the prices went up. And now one more fresh war in the Gulf. That's why this uncertainty will continue, and periodically, it's already hit 5 times in my lifetime. Every 10-15 years, there will be an oil crisis, energy crisis in the world. How does a country like India get around it? Now, I know it's very easy to say, let's go for alternatives, for renewables. That's being done. India is producing a lot of electricity with renewables now. In fact, India has beaten all its own targets. That is for electricity, however. So maybe as time passes, India will become less coal dependent for electricity. That's very good for carbon emissions. But you know what? That will not help India where gas and petrol are needed. Gas, petrol and diesel are needed. For that, India will need hydrocarbons of some kind or the other. So you might hate coal, with which India still produces 74% of its electricity. Remember, 74% of India's electricity is still produced with coal, and yet it is the same dirty, much maligned coal which may show India a way out of this gas dependence in some ways. Because a question came into my mind as I was reading up and as I've been following this story, and one thing that mystified me as I was studying this is how come the Chinese are not so hassled by this? How come the Chinese are not so stressed, even though they are also very import dependent on hydrocarbons? I know that the Chinese have pipelines coming in from Russia. They have a long land border, but all of their gas and oil needs cannot be met like that because China is a very large economy with a very high energy consumption. And then I discovered, as I checked around, that the Chinese actually started using coal and coal gasification, and they've bossed that business. They've bossed that business, while India has only been talking about it. India has been talking about it in the 11th 5-year plan, 12th 5-year plan, under the UPA, starting something, some pilot here, some pilot there. 2020, India started the National Coal Gasification Mission, and this is 2026. We are not producing even 1% what the China does. That's a story that I will tell you separately at some other time, maybe even in a national interest.